Brian Kelly told Wilson Alexander of The Advocate that he wants to put Harold Perkins back at inside linebacker. I think that it is absolutely a horrendous and horrible decision, and it feels like Brian Kelly is wasting Harold Perkins.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
All right, what's up, y'all? Welcome into Locked On LSU. Thank you for making us your first listen every single day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We're on YouTube as well. Hit that subscribe button, and you'll get notified as soon as new episodes of the podcast drop. Today's edition of Locked On LSU was brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today, and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. All right, let's get into it. This is a little bit of breaking news coming up from Wilson Alexander of The Advocate. Wilson sat down with LSU head coach Brian Kelly, and Brian Kelly shared with Wilson that he wants to put Harold Perkins back at inside linebacker. I think that is an absolutely terrible decision. We saw Harold Perkins at inside linebacker only once because it went so poorly that there was no other move that LSU could have made other than to move him out of that position. But we saw Harold Perkins play at inside linebacker against Florida State this past season. So the game in Orlando, not the game in New Orleans, but Florida State in 2023. And Harold Perkins was a complete and total non-factor in that game. Like, I don't know how many times you asked yourself where the heck Harold Perkins was. I know I asked myself several times, where in the world is Harold Perkins? Where is Harold Perkins? And I asked myself that about 20 to 30 times, maybe in the first quarter alone. Because we had grown so accustomed to Harold Perkins flying around everywhere and being where the ball was and being able to get after the quarterback on a consistent basis in 2022. Where was that? Against Florida State. Oh, yeah, well, he was put in a position that he shouldn't have been in, that he was a square peg in a round hole at the inside linebacker position. Tallied 5 tackles, 0 sacks, and like I said, was a non-factor against Florida State. I know that we can look at the final score against Florida State and say, well, you weren't a Harold Perkins away from being able to beat Florida State. Let's not forget LSU was beating Florida State at the half, and things really didn't get out of hand until the fourth quarter when Jordan Travis just absolutely ran wild and Johnny Wilson and Keon Coleman carved up your defense. I think you very much so could have been a Harold Perkins flying around on the outside away from beating Florida State, away from beating Ole Miss, away from beating Alabama. I think that you absolutely were Harold Perkins away. So after that first game, how it went so poorly, and the idea to move him in the inside looked so ridiculous that you moved him to Sam linebacker. I would have preferred to keep him out on the edge as a quarterback spy, but Brian Kelly and Matt House insisted that he play linebacker. Fine. They move him to Sam, kind of like a hybrid Sam Nickel kind of linebacker, and he was good. He was fine. He was not elite. He was not the same Harold Perkins that we saw in his freshman season in 2022, but he came up with big plays and important moments and timely sacks, but it still wasn't the same. Because Harold Perkins plays at his best when he's getting to the quarterback. I call it Arkansas 2022 the Harold Perkins game. Because wherever KJ Jefferson wanted to go, boom, bam, Harold Perkins was right on him. So Harold Perkins is best at getting to the quarterback. So let him do that. Let him do that. KISS, I always say. Keep it simple, stupid. You got a player that does something really well, but you take him away from it? You try to put him in a different position? Why? Well, Brian Kelly justifies it by saying that that's probably his best NFL fit. That Brian Kelly says that we owe it to Harold Perkins to develop him for the NFL. And I think that the sentiment is there. I think the sentiment is very admirable that Brian Kelly wants to develop not just Harold Perkins, but his players for the NFL. It is not Brian Kelly's job to develop players for the NFL. There is not a single head coach or coach in college football whose job it is to develop their players for the NFL. You got NFL coaches for that. Your NFL coaches can develop you for the NFL. What Brian Kelly's job is, what a college coach's job is, to develop your players to win football games for your team. What Brian Kelly's job is to develop players to win games for the LSU Tigers, to win championships for the LSU Tigers, to put his players in the best position to win games in an LSU uniform, not to develop Harold Perkins to be an inside linebacker for the Dallas Cowboys one day. You got coaches in the NFL that can do that. It just feels to me that putting Harold Perkins at the inside position, or really any other position other than on the edge or as a quarterback spy, or really frankly, just wherever the heck it is that Harold Perkins wants to be, is wasting Harold Perkins in an LSU uniform, because we know what he is capable of. We know how disruptive he can be with the quarterback. Can't do that when you put him on the inside. And you want to know how I know that? Because we saw it. And it went so terribly that you did it for one game and you said, wait, no, never mind. This is not it. Like, this is not where he needs to be. If it's not broke, why you got to go fixing it? Harold Perkins was not broken in 2022. But the position that you put him in, that was what was broken. The logic of moving Harold Perkins away, taking Superman's cape away, that is what was broken. So I think that it is truly inconceivable why Brian Kelly is doing this. Why you would essentially render Harold Perkins useless by putting him at the inside linebacker position, because when we've seen him at the inside linebacker position before, he was essentially rendered useless. But there is one situation. There is one thing that I can see that I'm willing to wait and see, that I'm willing to say, okay, maybe this actually could work after all. And we'll get into that coming up next after just a couple of words from our sponsors. All right, I want to tell you about FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. So bet on all of your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same game parlays, exclusive props, and there's so much more that you can get in on the action with on the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's not just money lines, it's not just spreads that you can make really fun live same game parlays, or you can place parlays that are constructed for you by the FanDuel Sportsbook app. There are so many different ways to get involved. So just visit FanDuel.com/locked on and shoot your shot. Again, that's FanDuel.com/locked on, and new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. All right, rolling along here, Locked On LSU. Thank you for making us your first listen every single day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, we're part of the Locked On Network, your team every single day. And Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every single league. So find Locked On Sports Today right now, available on the free Fire TV channels app. All right, rolling along here, Locked On LSU. Brian Kelly sat down with Wilson Alexander of The Advocate and said, we are putting Harold Perkins back at inside linebacker. We saw that experiment, and I did not like the ending. It was an experiment gone wrong. that in an incredibly critical game, an incredibly important game, you had one of your best, if not your best defensive players in a position where he looked completely out of place. So why are we putting him back there? Why? I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't understand why you would put a talent like Harold Perkins in a place where he's not going to thrive. It's simple. Don't overthink it. It's not that difficult. But there is one reason why I might be willing to give them a little bit of grace. One reason where I might say, okay, fine, I'll trust you and I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. And that's because you have a different coaching staff, and it's not just a different coaching staff, it's the Blake Baker difference. Does the Blake Baker difference apply to Harold Perkins? Was Harold Perkins' problem last season? And I say problem like it was Harold Perkins' fault. It was not. It was the coaching staff's fault. But was the problem with Harold Perkins last season, where he really was not as impactful as he was the year before, was that a coaching problem and not a position problem? Like, I am more than willing to entertain that, because I believe that the problem with the defense last season was a coaching problem and not necessarily a position problem. That coaching across the board defensively wasn't good enough. And Brian Kelly would agree, because that coaching staff is not there anymore. And because your defense was just that horrible that no one on that coaching staff is innocent. So it's very likely that it could have been a coaching problem and not a Harold Perkins in the wrong position problem, even though I still don't like Harold Perkins at inside linebacker. But I think that there is some truth to the Blake Baker difference, is what I'm going to call it. Because Blake Baker has a proven track record of developing linebackers, of getting the most out of linebacker talent. And we saw it here on full display at LSU. We saw that with Damone Clark. Damone Clark, in his first really 3 seasons, but his 2 seasons as a consistent player, Damone Clark was good and was not great. I think that we all were kind of looking at it like there was a lot more meat on the bone. Like, we expected more than we were all getting with Damone Clark. Then we go into the 2021 season. Blake Baker joins the LSU staff in 2021. That was his 1 year on the defensive staff at LSU. He was the linebackers coach at LSU. So just kind of to put that into perspective, in 2020, Damone Clark had 63 tackles, a sack, a pass breakup in 10 games. Because remember, the 2020 season was shortened due to COVID. So it's not a bad year. It's not a great year. It's not a year that jumps off the page that's like, oh my goodness, this is an elite player. So that was 2020. 2021, in Blake Baker's year at LSU, 1 year at LSU, 136 tackles, 5.5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, an interception, and 3 pass breakups. No matter where that even ranks amongst the rest of linebackers across the country or at LSU, that jump in 1 season from a player in year 3 versus year 4, that's massive. That is huge. And that is coaching. But hey, don't take my word for it. Take Damone Clark's word for it. Because Damone Clark was player of the week coming off of that first SEC game of the season against Mississippi State early in the season. This is, week 3, I believe, late September in the 2021 season. Damone Clark caught up with Emily Dixon of LSU football and kind of chatted about the week that he had, the game that he had against Mississippi State, and sung the praises of Blake Baker as a linebackers coach. This was Damone Clark in September of 2021 with Emily Dixon.
You've led the team in tackles each week and currently lead the SEC in tackles right now. What is it about Durante Jones' scheme and defense that's really clicked for you?
I mean, Coach Jones, his defense is just simple. You don't have to think so much. You just go out there and just play. You know your rules, and you just go out there and play. I just credit Coach Baker as well, because back in the spring, he told me the things that he was going to help me get better with, and as you can tell, I got better with it.
I was about to say, you said in the offseason that somebody that you felt could help elevate your game would be new linebackers coach Blake Baker, and it seems like you're already off to a great start, maybe one of your best seasons so far yet as a Tiger. So what has been his feedback to you through this first third of the season?
I mean, the biggest thing he always tell me is just trust what you see. You just go out there and play. Don't be scared to make mistakes because, the coaches coach and the players play, and you're just going to correct the things that need to be corrected. But, I mean, one thing he just say go all out. Don't sit there and leave nothing to chance. Just go out there every play because, you're going to mess up, and he just always tell me that. Just play. Don't worry about nothing else. Just play.
Again, that was Damone Clark in 2021 after the Mississippi State game. And against Mississippi State in 2021, he had 15 total tackles and a fumble recovery. And that would notch one of many double-digit and in the teens tackles for Damone Clark in the 2021 season. Ultimately ended up getting drafted by the Dallas Cowboys in the 5th round after that season. Damone Clark was the one that brought up Blake Baker and what he did, what he was coaching him to do. Raved about what he said. Like, just go out there. Don't overthink it. Just go out there and play. I felt like at times last season, Harold Perkins was maybe thinking about it too much, right? Because the year before, he could just go out there and do whatever the heck he wanted to do. See ball, get ball. See quarterback, attack quarterback. He wasn't doing that last season because of coaching. Because he wasn't coached up to do what he was supposed to do. So I am willing to give the benefit of the doubt to the Blake Baker defense. The Blake Baker difference. Because Blake Baker has a track record doing it. He has a track record doing it at LSU. He has a track record developing linebackers at Missouri. So I'm willing to give it the benefit of the doubt. I still don't like it. And I still think it's the wrong decision. Because I think that's really not that difficult, right? You have a really good player, an elite player that is elite at doing something. You probably would want to put that player who is elite at doing that thing in a position to do that thing. It's really not that complicated. So I still don't love it, and I still genuinely really don't understand it. But with Blake Baker, if it's going to work, I think it could work under Blake Baker. But we'll see. We'll see. Genuinely, I don't get it. But Brian Kelly said he wants to develop Harold Perkins for the NFL. I don't really necessarily think that's his responsibility. But if that's where they're going to put him, that's where they're going to put him. But Harold Perkins is your best defensive player. Harold Perkins might be your best player. Put your best players, put all of your players in a position to succeed. Is Harold Perkins going to succeed at inside linebacker? They would know better than I do. So, guess we'll see. Speaking of some positional changes, Brian Kelly told us last time that he spoke with the media in a press conference that, of course, defensive tackle was a position of concern, a position of need, a position that I wholeheartedly believe they intend to address in the spring transfer portal window. But he said, look, we could have some answers sitting in our locker room, and Brian Kelly has made some of those changes. We'll get into that coming up next, what that means for the defensive line, what that means for the offensive line too, because that is coming into play here as well. So we'll get into that coming up next after just a few words from our sponsors. All right, I want to tell you about Game Time. So, Game Time is super fast and it's an incredibly easy way to buy tickets for all of the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. They've got killer last minute deals, all in prices, views from your seat, and the best price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. So, I actually, genuinely, every single time I go to buy tickets for any event, whether it's a game or a concert, I've been looking up comedy show tickets the past few days. I always go to Game Time first because I know exactly what my seat is going to look like. Like, there's nothing worse than buying tickets to whatever event, and then you sit down and you think, well, the picture online looked like it was a lot closer to the stage, or I didn't realize there was going to be a big pole in front of me and obstructing my view of the field. That's not the case with Game Time. You know exactly what you are going to get and what your view will be. I also know that Game Time has the best price guarantee. One thing that is so frustrating, I know I'm frustrated by it, I'm sure you are too. When you go to buy tickets on a third party ticket website, you find a price, you say, okay, that's good, that falls within my budget. Then you go to check out, and it's like, whoa, 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 where did all these taxes and fees come from? The taxes and fees are more expensive than the ticket itself. That is not the case with Game Time. I genuinely love it. I think that you will too. So try it out, Game Time. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Terms apply. Just download the Game Time app and use code uh, locked on for $20 off of your first purchase. Again, that's Game Time. Download the Game Time app. Use code locked on for $20 off of your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, rolling along here, locked on LSU. So Brian Kelly, last time he spoke with the media, said, look, we're going to probably move some guys around from the offensive line to the defensive line. Probably going to move some of our reserve tackles or swing tackles, see if they would work as a defensive tackle. As we know, you lost your two starting defensive tackles to the draft. You lost Mekhi Wingo and you lost Mason Smith. Those guys aren't easily replaceable. Like, you don't replace Mason Smith. Like, that kind of size, you don't replace that. And at least you don't replace it very easily or overnight. So that left two massive holes at the defensive tackle position, holes that, frankly, there's not guys on the roster that stand out that's the clear cut apprentice to those two, or the clear cut heir of the defensive tackle position. So Brian Kelly alluded to moving some players from the offensive side of the ball to the defensive side of the ball. And we learned that Kimo Makaneole will be moving from offensive line to defensive tackle. So Kimo Makaneole is going into his fourth season at LSU. Came in as a freshman, didn't see any work, redshirted his second year, and this past year saw some limited work, served mostly as a backup right tackle. Saw some work against Army and against Grambling, but more so in a limited capacity, more of a reserve tackle. As we know, Lance Hurd was more of your backup go-to tackle, that if Emory Jones or Will Campbell weren't available, that Lance Hurd would be that go-to guy. So it kind of pushed Makaneole down the depth chart. But now he will be moving to defensive tackle. 6'4", 310 pounds. That's like NFL defensive tackle size, right? That's pretty standard DT size. Mason Smith had some more weight on him, but that's the thing that you want to beware of having a defensive tackle and offensive tackles as well, is when you add more weight that takes away speed. Mason Smith had that really rare combination of size and speed. But if Kimo Makanele has the size, and he does 6'4", 310, that really is, if you could draw up a defensive tackle, it's going to be pretty comparable to that size. But if he has the footwork, if he has the speed, he has the ability to move and be shifty, then I see the traits. I see how that fits into a defensive tackle. He played both sides in high school. He was predominantly an interior offensive lineman in high school and was, graded very highly as an interior offensive lineman, but just never really saw that fit at LSU over the past few years. So he at least has the experience playing on the defensive side of the ball in high school, hasn't done it at the college level. I expressed my feelings on this when it first happened. I don't love this. Like, it reeks of desperation to me when you have to move a player from the offensive side of the ball to the defensive side of the ball just to give yourself a little bit of depth. I don't think that it's a change that happens easily, nor is it a change that I think that happens quickly. Like, who knows? Like, Kimo Makanele might go out there in spring practice and just pick it up like that, and it's no problem, and he can be a starting defensive tackle. I'm not going to put my money on that. Hope is not a strategy. So I'm not just going to hope that this is a change that happens quickly, easily, and incredibly successfully. If he can be the kind of guy that he can come in for you for a few snaps and be serviceable, then great. I think that that's probably the ceiling here for Kimo Makanele, that he's an option for you, a go-to option, that you need a guy to go in, get the job done, that he can do that. In Bo Davis, we trust. We shall see. We'll see. I'm not going to get up here today and say that he's going to be a first-team All-SEC kind of defensive tackle. I don't think that's going to be the case, and I think those would be incredibly unfair expectations. To expect a guy who's been playing offensive line the last 3 years at the college level, whose predominant position in high school was on the offensive line, to all of a sudden just overnight become an elite D tackle. I don't think that's necessarily fair, but you at least have some depth at the D tackle position. Again, don't love it, but hey, you got to do what you got to do. Kimo Makanele moving to defensive tackle does not adequately address your DT need. I think you still need to go out and find some guys in the spring transfer portal window. Again, are those guys going to be first team All SEC DTs? No, they're not, because I don't think that the spring transfer portal window is where you find game changers. I don't think that the spring transfer portal window is where you find elite players. It's where you can find depth in the transfer portal. And that's no disrespect to those guys. It's just the nature of the transfer portal. The reason why you transfer in the spring, more likely than not, is because you don't see a path to starting where you are that at your prospective school. Maybe it's a coaching change kind of thing. Maybe it's a fit kind of thing. Of course, those are always outliers, but more likely than not, it's because you don't have a clear path to being a starter at that school. So we'll see. Kima Makanele making that jump from the offensive line to the defensive tackle. This is where you put a lot of faith into your coaches. That's the theme overall of today's show. Is moving players into different positions, developing them at new positions. That is where Blake Baker and Bo Davis and the rest of this coaching staff makes their paychecks. That's going to do it for me today. Thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast. Coming up on tomorrow's edition of Locked On LSU, we're going to catch up with Brian Smith, Locked On's official recruiting insider. What is the latest on potentially the future of DBU? We'll get into that on tomorrow's edition of Locked On LSU.